1400 years ago, a group of church leaders gathered in a city called Laodicea and made a decision that quietly erased an entire book from most of the Bibles printed today. The book was called Enoch. It had been read, copied, and quoted for centuries. The New Testament itself quotes it by name. And then, almost overnight, it was gone, left out, set aside, treated as too dangerous to sit beside the other scriptures. But one church refused. High in the mountains of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept Enoch inside its Bible and never took it out. To this day, if you open an Ethiopian Bible, the book of Enoch is still there, exactly where it has always been, in a language most of the world forgot how to read. And inside that book are 7 warnings. 7 descriptions of what the world would look like in the final days before judgment. Not vague poetry. Specific conditions. The corruption of knowledge. The rise of deception. The defiling of the earth. And a 4th warning so strange that for 2,000 years it made almost no sense to anyone reading it, because nothing like it had ever been observed by human eyes, until now. Because the 4th warning describes the sky itself breaking its order. The lights of heaven wandering out of their appointed places. And over the last several decades, scientists tracking the Earth have begun recording something that matches those ancient words with an accuracy nobody expected. This is what the Ethiopian Bible warned about. And of the 7, the 4th is the one that appears to be unfolding right now. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the Book of Enoch that Laodicea struck from the canon, the 7 warnings laid out in order, the exact gaze wording of the 4th one, and the Council of Laodicea's own recorded ruling that removed the book. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. To understand why these warnings carry weight, you have to understand what the Book of Enoch actually is, because it is not a modern invention, and it is not a fringe forgery. It is old, older than most of the New Testament. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were pulled out of the caves at Qumran in the middle of the 20th century, archaeologists found fragments of Enoch in the original Aramaic, more copies than they found of several books that made it into the Old Testament. That means the communities living around the time of Jesus were reading Enoch seriously. They treated it as scripture. The letter of Jude, sitting in your Bible right now, quotes Enoch directly and calls him a prophet. So this was never an obscure text hiding in a corner. It was mainstream. It shaped how ancient Jews and early Christians understood angels, judgment, and the end of the age. And then, at Laodicea and in the councils that followed, the Western Church made a choice to close the canon and leave Enoch outside of it. The Ethiopian Church, cut off by geography and history from Rome, simply kept reading. They preserved the complete text in Ge'ez, an ancient liturgical language, and for centuries, theirs was the only complete version of Enoch left on earth. That is the strange gift of Ethiopia. While the rest of the world lost the book, one mountain kingdom kept it whole. For more than 1,000 years, the West did not even have a copy to argue about. Enoch survived only as a rumor, a name quoted in old letters, a book everyone had heard of and nobody could read. It was not until a Scottish traveler carried Ge'ez manuscripts out of Ethiopia and back to Europe in the late 1700s that scholars finally held the complete text in their hands again. When they translated it, the reaction was a mix of fascination and alarm, because the book did not read like a gentle devotional. It read like a warning delivered across thousands of years, aimed at a generation the writer clearly believed would one day exist. And when those scholars finally got the full Ethiopian text open on the table, they found it packed with descriptions of the last days. 7 of them stand out. Let's walk through them one at a time, because each one lands differently than it did even 100 years ago. The first warning is the corruption of knowledge. The oldest section of Enoch tells the story of the Watchers, a group of heavenly beings who came down and did something they were never supposed to do. They taught humanity. But it wasn't the teaching of a patient mentor. It was the release of knowledge that people were not ready to hold. The text names the teachers one by one. One taught the making of weapons and blades. One taught metallurgy, the working of metals ripped out of the ground. One taught the mixing of cosmetics and the arts of seduction. Others taught sorcery, the cutting of roots, the reading of the stars, and the signs of the sky. Read that list slowly, and something uncomfortable happens. Enoch is describing the sudden arrival of advanced knowledge that outruns the wisdom of the people receiving it. And the result, in the text, is not progress. It is collapse. Violence multiplies. The strong devour the weak. The world fills with things human beings built but could not control. Those who study this passage today hear an unsettling echo. We live in an age where knowledge doubles faster than any generation can absorb it. We built tools that can level cities, edit the code of life, and think in ways their makers do not fully understand. The first warning of Enoch is not that knowledge is evil. It is that knowledge without wisdom is a fuse. And the ancient text says that fuse was lit at the very beginning, and it burns toward a specific end. What makes the passage feel like a warning rather than a story is the way it ends. In Enoch, the arrival of forbidden knowledge does not produce a golden age. It produces the flood. The world becomes so saturated with the things the Watchers taught, so drunk on power it never earned, that heaven decides the only mercy left is to wash it clean and start again. And the beings who release that knowledge are not forgiven. The text says they are bound and shut away to await a final judgment at the end of the age. Enoch's point is chilling in its simplicity. The first time knowledge outran wisdom, it did not end in progress. It ended in judgment, and he frames that first catastrophe as a rehearsal, a pattern that the last generation would repeat on a far larger scale. The second warning is deception dressed as light. Enoch describes a time when the eternal law is perverted, when lies are spoken as if they were truth, and when many are led astray by teachers who look righteous on the outside. The text is blunt about it. It warns of those who write lying words and lead the world into error. And it says that in the last days, deception will not come wearing horns. It will come wearing robes. It will come quoting scripture. It will come sounding wise. This is one of the reasons Enoch made church leaders nervous. It draws a line between the appearance of holiness and the reality of it, and it warns that in the final generation the appearance would be everywhere and the reality would be rare. The people of that age, Enoch says, would call evil good and good evil, and they would be so surrounded by the lie that the truth would sound like the offense. Sit in a world of infinite information, where anyone can manufacture a convincing voice, a convincing face, a convincing miracle on a screen, and this second warning stops feeling ancient. It starts feeling like a description of the exact problem we cannot solve. How do you know what is real? Enoch says that question would define the last days, and that most people would answer it wrong. The third warning is the defiling of the earth. In the Enoch account, the corruption of the Watchers does not stay in heaven. It pours down into the ground. The earth becomes filled with violence and with blood. And then something remarkable happens in the text. The earth itself speaks. It cries out. It makes an accusation before heaven, complaining of the blood poured onto it and the ruin worked upon it. In Enoch, the ground is not a silent stage. It is a witness, and it testifies against the people who defiled it. For most of history, that image sounded like myth. A planet that bleeds. A ground that accuses. But read it now. In a century, measuring dead zones spreading across the oceans, forests falling faster than they regrow, and species vanishing at a rate the fossil record only shows during mass extinctions, and the third warning takes on a weight it never had before. Enoch describes a world that was wounded by human hands until the wound itself began to speak. That is a hard image to shake once you have seen it. And the text is careful about the order of blame. In Enoch, the earth is not defiled by accident. It is defiled by the same corruption that started in the heavens and poured downward, step by step, until it soaked into the soil and the water. The wound to the world is presented as the physical proof that something has gone wrong at a much deeper level. You do not get a bleeding planet from a healthy civilization. You get it from a civilization that has already lost its way and simply has not admitted it yet. The defiling of the earth, in Enoch, is the body showing the symptoms of a sickness that lives in the soul. And the text is careful to say this defiling is not the end. It is a sign. It is the third mark on a countdown, the evidence that the age is turning. Which brings us to the warning at the center of everything, the one that was impossible to understand until our own lifetime. Before we move on to the next warning, stop for a second. What you just heard about the sky breaking its order is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Ge'ez passage, the altered order, the shortened years. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The fourth warning is the heavens breaking their appointed order. This is the one. In a section of Enoch scholars call the astronomical book, the text lays out the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars with obsessive care. Each light has its gate. Each has its season. Each rises and sets on a schedule fixed by heaven. Enoch treats this order as sacred, a clock built into the sky that has kept perfect time since creation. And then Enoch delivers the warning. He says that in the days of the sinners, the order will fail. Listen to how close the ancient words are. The text says the years will be shortened, and the seasons will not come in their proper time. It says the moon will alter its order and not appear when it should. And then comes the line that stops people cold. It says that many chiefs of the stars will transgress the order, that they will change their courses and their tasks, and that they will not appear at the times prescribed for them. For 2,000 years, that passage sat there like a locked door. The stars do not move off their courses. The heavens are the one thing in human experience that never breaks down. Sailors set their lives by them. Farmers set their calendars by them. The sky was the definition of reliable. So a prophecy that the lights of heaven would wander out of their appointed places was, for most of history, simply unreadable. It described a thing that had never happened and, as far as anyone could tell, never could. Then, in the last several decades, the Earth started doing something it was not supposed to do. The planet has a magnetic field, an invisible shield generated deep in its molten core. That field is what a compass reads. It is what tells migrating birds and fish which way to go. It is what deflects the deadly radiation streaming off the sun and keeps the atmosphere from being stripped away. For as long as we have measured it, it has been the quiet, dependable thing beneath everything else, the unseen order behind the visible sky. And that field is now moving in ways that have alarmed the scientists watching it. Magnetic north, the point every compass on Earth points toward, has begun sprinting. For most of the last century, it drifted slowly, a few miles a year. In recent decades, it accelerated, racing across the top of the world so fast that the global models used for navigation had to be rewritten ahead of schedule to keep ships and planes from being led wrong. The lights sailors trusted, the direction the needle promised, quietly stopped being where the old charts said they were. At the same time, a vast region of the field over the South Atlantic has been weakening. Satellites passing through it hit a zone where the shield thins out, where instruments glitch and fail more often. A growing dent in the planet's armor that has even split into two lobes in a way researchers did not predict. The European Space Agency launched an entire fleet of satellites just to monitor the field, because the changes were happening fast enough to demand constant attention. Go back to the astronomical book for a moment, because the imagery there is stranger than most people realize. Enoch does not simply say the stars move. He describes the sky as a machine of gates and portals, appointed openings through which each light must rise and set, each in its own season, each in its own turn. The whole vision is of a heaven built like a mechanism, with tolerances and schedules kept in flawless order by law. And the warning is precisely that this mechanism, the one thing designed never to fail, would in the final days begin to fall out of true. The gates would open at the wrong times. The lights would drift from their portals. The clock would slip. Now think about what the magnetic field actually governs. It is the reason a needle points north. It is the invisible framework that navigation itself is built on. For thousands of years, human beings found their way across empty oceans by trusting that the directions were fixed. Enoch's warning is that, in the last days, that trust would be broken, that the ones who set their course by the old order would find themselves quietly, dangerously wrong. And that is not a metaphor anymore. Airports have had to repaint runway numbers because the magnetic bearings they were named for had drifted. Migratory birds, which navigate by sensing the very field that is now shifting, have turned up disoriented and off course in events scientists still cannot fully explain. The framework beneath the sky is moving, and the creatures and instruments that depend on it are beginning to lose their way. Now hold the ancient words against the modern data. Enoch warned that the fixed order behind the sky would begin to fail, that the directions would betray those who trusted them, that the appointed places would no longer hold. He described it as a marker of the final generation, the moment the clock in the heavens began to slip. And in our lifetime, the compass has started to lie, the shield has started to thin, and the invisible order behind the sky has started immeasurably to move. I am not telling you the world is ending on a date. No honest person can hand you that. But I am telling you that of all 7 warnings, the 4th is the one that went from impossible to describe to sitting in a scientific database within a single human lifetime. For 2,000 years, it made no sense. Now it reads like a report. That is why the 4th warning is the one people cannot look away from. The 5th warning is the reign of the greedy over the poor. Deep in the later chapters, Enoch turns into something almost like a courtroom, and he pronounces a long series of woes against a specific kind of person. Not against sinners in general, but against the rich who built their fortunes on injustice. Woe to those who acquire silver and gold by unrighteousness, the text says, and then say we have become wealthy and will do as we please. Woe to those who devour the labor of others. Woe to those who lay the foundations of their houses with the blood of the oppressed. Enoch is savage on this point, and it is one of the reasons the book was hard for the powerful to keep on the shelf. It says the last days would be marked by a world where the gap between those who have everything and those who have nothing grows into a canyon, where wealth is worshipped openly, and where the people crushed at the bottom cry out and, for a long and terrible stretch, no answer comes. The text promises the answer arrives eventually, at judgment. But the warning is that the age just before judgment would be an age of staggering inequality dressed up as success. You do not have to strain to hear that one either. The fifth warning is about a civilization that measures a human life by what it owns. And Enoch says that measurement is one of the loudest signs of how late the hour has become. The sixth warning is violence without limit, and love grown cold. Enoch describes the final generation as one saturated in bloodshed, where the sword is never far away, where brother turns on brother, and where the natural bonds that hold people together simply dissolve. The compassion that used to be assumed between neighbors becomes rare. Cruelty becomes ordinary. The text speaks of a world so used to violence that it stops flinching, a generation that can watch horrors and feel nothing. This warning pairs with the others like a lock and key. Corrupted knowledge builds the weapons. Deception removes the shared truth that once restrained people. Inequality lights the fuse of resentment. And the result, the sixth warning says, is a world where violence becomes the background noise of ordinary life, and the human heart slowly freezes over. Enoch's word for the last generation is not simply wicked, it is cold. A coldness that spreads until warmth itself feels naive. That coldness is the detail people tend to miss. It is easy to picture the end of the age as fire and thunder. Enoch pictures something quieter and more terrible. He pictures a generation that has simply stopped being able to feel. A world where suffering scrolls past and nobody stops, where cruelty is entertainment, where the death of strangers is a number and not a wound. The sixth warning is not really about how much violence there is, it is about how little it moves us, and that is a symptom you cannot measure with any instrument, only recognize in the mirror. And the seventh warning is the one everything has been building toward: judgment itself. The book of Enoch opens with it and closes with it, and the whole text bends toward it like a river toward the sea. Enoch says the day will come when the Holy One steps out of his dwelling and comes down, and the text describes him arriving with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all. The mountains melt. The earth is torn open. Everything hidden is dragged into the light. And every one of the previous 6 warnings turns out to have been a countdown, each sign a mark on a clock ticking toward this final hour. But here is what makes Enoch different from a simple doom prophecy. The 7th warning is not only terror, it is also a promise of vindication. For the ones who were crushed by the powerful, who held to the truth when the whole world called it a lie, who kept faith while the sky itself came loose, judgment is not the end of hope. It is the moment the accounts are finally settled. Enoch says, the righteous will not be forgotten. That is the strange comfort buried inside the most frightening book left out of the Bible. The same day that undoes the wicked is the day that lifts up the faithful. And notice the structure of it. Every earlier warning was a description of a world coming apart. The 7th is the description of that world being answered. The knowledge that outran wisdom is called to account. The deception is stripped bare, and the truth stands exposed for everyone to see. The defiled earth is healed. The order of the heavens is restored. The greedy who reigned are pulled down, and the violent who felt nothing finally feel everything. Enoch does not present judgment as chaos. He presents it as the return of order to a universe that had been sliding out of it for generations. The 7th warning is not the end of the story. In Enoch's vision, it is the moment the story is finally set right. So step back and look at the 7 together, because they were never meant to be read in isolation. Knowledge outruns wisdom. Deception replaces truth. The earth is defiled until it cries out. The order of the heavens begins to fail. The greedy reign over the poor. Violence spreads, and love grows cold. And then the day of judgment arrives to close the age. Read as a list, they are unsettling. Read as a sequence, they are something else. They describe an arc. A civilization that gains power faster than character, loses its grip on what is real, wounds the world beneath it, watches the very sky slip out of order, worships wealth, drowns in violence, and finally meets the reckoning it spent generations earning. And the strangest part is not that an ancient book described a dark future. Plenty of ancient books did that. The strangest part is that the one warning that should have been impossible, the one about the heavens themselves breaking their appointed order, is the one our instruments are now recording in real time. That is why the Ethiopian Bible matters. Not because Ethiopia is exotic, but because Ethiopia is the reason we can still read this at all. Every other tradition let the book go. One kingdom in the mountains held on to it through 14 centuries of fire and forgetting, and because they did, We can hold these 7 warnings up against our own age and decide for ourselves what we are looking at. Maybe it is coincidence. Maybe an ancient writer describing a failing sky simply got lucky with a metaphor that our science happened to grow into. That is a fair thing to believe, and I will not tell you it is wrong. But the men at Laodicea did not remove Enoch because it was harmless. They removed it because it was dangerous. Because it named things too clearly. Because it drew the line between the appearance of holiness and the reality of it and dared the powerful to stand on the wrong side of that line. They tried to close the book. Ethiopia kept it open. And the 4th warning, the one that slept for 2,000 years waiting for a generation that could finally understand it, has quietly begun to wake. Whatever you believe about where it ends, the words are still there, exactly where they have always been, patiently describing a sky that has just started to move. Think about the odds of that for a moment. A writer in the ancient world with no telescope, no satellite, no way to know the Earth had a magnetic field, chose to warn of a future in which the fixed order behind the heavens would fail. He could have warned of 100 other things: famine, war, fire from the sky. Instead, he reached for the one image that should have been unthinkable, the sky itself losing its place, and he set it down as a sign of the end. For 2,000 years, it was the strangest line in the book. Today, it is the one we can check. Maybe that is nothing. Maybe it is everything. Enoch does not force the answer on you. He simply lays out the 7 warnings, in order, and steps back. The question the book leaves you with is not whether the warnings are real. The question is what you do now that you have read them.